The scent of burning cordite and spilled expensive Merlot hung heavy in the air, choking the grand ballroom. High above, the massive crystal chandelier lay shattered across the polished marble floor, its broken prisms reflecting the flickering, violent red of emergency lights. A year ago, I was an ordinary woman. Now, I was standing in the center of a slaughterhouse wearing a shredded Vera Wang wedding dress. The pristine white silk was ruined, heavily splattered with the blood of men who had tried to tear me away from him. My hands shook violently. The heavy, cold steel of the handgun felt alien in my grip, the barrel trembling as I pointed it directly between the eyes of the man kneeling before me. Choi Min-jae, the infamous Viper, looked up at me through a mask of his own blood. He spat onto the floor, a desperate, breathless laugh rattling in his chest. "You don't have the guts, little girl," he sneered, trying to mask the raw terror bleeding into his eyes. "You're a civilian. You pull that trigger, and you can never go back to your perfect, clean world." The heavy click of a leather dress shoe echoed through the ruined hall. From the deep shadows of the VIP balcony, a silhouette emerged. Kang Tae-sung. His immaculate charcoal suit jacket was gone, and his white button-down shirt was shredded, soaked through with a dark, terrifying crimson. A fresh bullet wound leaked heavily from his shoulder, but his stride didn't waver. He moved with the terrifying, lethal grace of an apex predator. He looked like a fallen god rising from the ashes of hell, entirely unbothered by the chaos surrounding him. He didn't even glance at the rival gang leader groveling on the floor. His piercing, obsessive gaze was fixed solely on me. Step by step, the distance between us closed, until the radiating heat of his massive frame enveloped me. Tae-sung stepped up directly behind me, his towering shadow swallowing me whole. I could smell the intoxicating mix of his expensive cedarwood cologne and the metallic tang of iron. Slowly, a large, calloused hand, warm and wet with his own blood, wrapped firmly over my trembling fingers. His grip was an anchor, instantly steadying the heavy weapon in my hands. His broad chest pressed flush against my back, his heartbeat a slow, rhythmic, terrifying thud against my spine. He leaned down, his sharp jaw brushing the shell of my ear. When he spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly baritone that sent a dark shiver straight down my core. "Pull the trigger, wife, or I will." The transition from my quiet life to the belly of Seoul's underworld happened in a blur of blinding neon lights and brute force. Two heavy-handed men dragged me through the damp, subterranean corridors of Club Inferno, the thumping bass vibrating through the floorboards like a dying heartbeat. They threw me ruthlessly onto a plush velvet sofa inside a secluded VIP lounge, where the air smelled of expensive whiskey, cigar smoke, and quiet, absolute danger. Sitting across from me was Kang Tae-sung. Even in the dim amber light, his presence was suffocating. He didn't look like a common gangster. He looked like dark royalty wrapped in a bespoke black suit. His sharp, glacial eyes locked onto mine, stripping away whatever phantom armor I had left. "Your father owes $2 million to men who harvest organs for sport," Tae-sung said, his voice a smooth, terrifyingly calm purr. He slid a sleek, heavy document across the marble table. "I have already bought his debt. In exchange, you will give me 1 year of your life, a legal, spotless marriage to satisfy my syndicate's traditional board. Do we have an understanding?" Pure terror paralyzed me. A marriage to a monster. I felt a hot, helpless tear escape my eye, tracking down my pale cheek. Before I could pull away, Tae-sung leaned forward. His large, calloused thumb gently brushed the tear from my skin. The touch was agonizingly slow, a gesture far too intimate for a stranger. It sent a sudden electric jolt through my veins, melting my paralysis into a fierce, desperate resolve. If I had to walk into hell to keep my father alive, I would. "I don't have a pen," I whispered, my voice shaking but hardening with every passing second. Tae-sung's lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. He picked up a silver letter opener from the table, its edge gleaming under the low lights, and lightly pressed it against the pad of my index finger. A sharp sting and a rich bead of crimson swelled. I didn't flinch. I pressed my bleeding finger firmly against the signature line, leaving a dark, indelible smear of blood. "A year," I demanded, staring straight into his dark, bottomless eyes. "Then I am free." "Of course," he murmured, though the predatory look in his eyes suggested otherwise. "But your old life ends tonight. You aren't going back to your apartment." Before I can even protest, I was swept away into a black armored car, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. We arrived at a towering penthouse skyscraper in the heart of the city. The private elevator shot upward, depositing us into a sprawling, hyper-luxurious penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a golden fortress. The massive, reinforced steel doors slammed shut behind us with a heavy, echoing thud, the automatic electronic locks engaging with terrifying finality. Tae-sung didn't look back at me as he unbuttoned his suit jacket. He turned to the two stone-faced guards standing at the entrance. "No one gets in," he commanded, his voice echoing coldly in the vast space. "She never gets out." The penthouse was a masterclass in architectural arrogance, all floor-to-ceiling glass, cold white marble, and a suffocating, heavy silence. For 3 days, I was forbidden from leaving the living quarters, restricted by a list of rules delivered by Ryu Jin-yu, Tae-sung's sharp-eyed lieutenant. Jin-yu looked at me not as a person, but as a dangerous liability, his eyes tracking my every movement with open hostility whenever he brought my meals. I was a ghost, trapped in a museum of modern luxury, expected to sit quietly, look beautiful, and wait for my captor to command me. But I refused to be a silent doll. On the 4th night, I broke the perimeter. I stepped into Tae-sung's private, forbidden study, running my fingers over the dark wood desk, searching for anything that could give me leverage. "I believe I made the boundaries clear, Yoon Se-yeon." His deep voice sliced through the dark. I spun around to find Tae-sung standing in the doorway, his tie loosened, the top buttons of his shirt undone. "I am your contract wife, not your prisoner," I snapped, stepping toward him, my voice ringing with a defiance I didn't know I still possessed. "You bought my father's debt, not my soul. I will not sit in a room and choke in your silence." "You will do exactly what keeps you alive," he countered, closing the distance between us with slow, menacing steps. "My world is full of people waiting for me to show a single weakness. Right now, that weakness is you." "Then let me go," I defied him, my chest heaving as I glared up into his icy eyes. "If I'm such a burden, void the contract." The word void seemed to snap something behind his calm facade. In a blur of motion that stole the breath from my lungs, Tae-sung lunged forward. His hands gripped my waist, lifting me slightly as he slammed my back against the wall. The impact was startling but not painful, immediately followed by the overwhelming scorching heat of his body anchoring me in place. Our breaths mingled in the narrow space between us. His fingers dug into my hips, possessive and trembling with a dark, restrained anger. His eyes scanned my face, dropping to my lips before locking back onto mine with a terrifying, addictive intensity. "You are mine for the next 362 days. Never suggest otherwise again." For a long, breathless moment, neither of us moved, trapped in a current of pure, undeniable electricity. Hours later, the heat of his touch still burned against my skin as I lay awake in the dark bedroom. The silence of the penthouse felt heavier now, charged with a danger that didn't just come from the streets below. I closed my eyes, trying to force sleep, when a strange tint caught the edge of my vision. I bolted upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling window, a single, blood-red dot of a laser sight was slowly sweeping across the glass, hunting through the darkness until it settled directly over my chest. The red dot burned against my skin. Before I could even scream, the reinforced glass shattered into a million glittering shards with a deafening crack. In the exact fraction of a second the bullet pierced the room, a heavy, dark shadow tackled me off the bed. Tae-sung. He slammed me to the hardwood floor, his massive body completely blanketing mine as a second bullet whistled overhead, embedding itself into the wall. I heard a sharp, guttural grunt of pain from above me, followed by the warm, terrifying drip of liquid falling onto my bare shoulder. Tae-sung, I gasped, trapped beneath him, as the penthouse alarms finally began to wail, a shrill, deafening siren. Stay down, he commanded, but his voice lacked its usual untouchable steel. It was strained, breathless. As the automated steel shutters rolled down over the shattered windows, plunging us into shadow, he finally rolled off me. He sat against the edge of the bed, clutching his upper arm. Blood was already soaking through the sleeve of his black silk shirt. For the first time, I saw a flicker of raw pain in his eyes, a crack in the armor of the invincible Mafia king. "You're hurt," I said, my hands trembling as I knelt beside him. "It's just a graze. Go to the safe room. Jin-woo is on his way," he muttered, trying to push me away. "No," I defied him, gripping his uninjured shoulder. "Let me help you." Slowly, his grip loosened. I peeled the blood-soaked silk away from his shoulder. My breath caught, not just from the jagged, bleeding line the bullet had torn into his flesh, but from what lay beneath. His back and chest were a canvas of dark, intricate syndicate ink, a fierce white tiger writhing through shadows, marred by horrific, pale lines of old blade cuts and bullet entry wounds. "Does it frighten you?" he whispered, his eyes tracking me through the mirror. "No," I breathed, dipping a cotton pad in antiseptic. I pressed it to the wound. He winced, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle twitched. I blew gently on the sting, my fingers lingering on his bare, hot skin. The proximity was intoxicating, the danger outside fading against the sudden, overwhelming heat between us. "The Viper Gang is getting reckless," he muttered, his gaze darkening as he watched my hands care for him. "They are testing my boundaries. They want a war." The heavy bathroom doors swung open, and a pale Ryu Jin-woo stepped inside, holding a small black velvet box drenched in fresh, wet crimson. "Boss," Jin-woo said, his voice hollow, "this just arrived at the front gate." Tae-sung took the box, opening it with steady fingers. Inside, resting in a pool of blood, was my father's silver watch. The bloody watch delivered to the penthouse left no room for retreat. Hiding would only signal weakness to the syndicate. So 48 hours later, I was strapped into a backless, blood-red silk gown, standing at the entrance of Seoul's most exclusive underworld gala. My father was still alive. Jin-woo had confirmed the watch was a warning, not a death notice, but the ticking clock of his survival echoed in my mind. "Head up," Tae-sung murmured, sliding his hand to the small of my back as the grand doors opened. "Show them you belong to a king." I swallowed the suffocating knot of terror in my throat, lifting my chin. Walking beside Kang Tae-sung into a room of killers in designer suits required a mask of absolute ice. I forced my spine straight, meeting the hungry, calculating stares of the criminal elite with a cold, unbothered gaze. I wasn't just a terrified daughter anymore. I was playing the untouchable wife of the Baeko Syndicate's apex predator. We moved through the glittering ballroom, but the whispered murmurs and lingering eyes of the men around us made the muscles in Tae-sung's jaw tick with violent tension. When a rival underboss let his gaze drag blatantly down the exposed curve of my spine, Tae-sung's hand tightened possessively on my waist. Without a word, he pulled me straight onto the center of the dance floor. He pulled me flush against his solid chest, his large palm hot against my bare skin, leaving no space for light between us. "Don't look at them," he commanded, his voice a low, dark rumble vibrating against my ribs as we moved to the slow, heavy cello music. His eyes were entirely consumed by a dangerous, feral possessiveness. "Look at me. Let them burn." For those 3 minutes, the rest of the dangerous world melted away under his intense, intoxicating gravity. But the illusion shattered the moment the song ended, and Jin-woo urgently pulled Tae-sung aside to deal with a security breach. I stepped toward the champagne tower to catch my breath, only to find my path blocked by a man in a flashy emerald suit. His smile was sharp, sadistic, and dripping with malice. "Stunning," Choi Min-jae, the Viper himself, whispered, stepping close enough for me to smell his cloying cologne. "You play the devoted wife so well, but has your monster told you the truth? He didn't save you from your father's debt, little bird. He built the cage." Before I could process the chilling venom of his words, Tae-sung was there, his mere presence radiating a murderous intent that made Min-jae back away with a mocking bow. Tae-sung's eyes were stormy as he instantly grabbed my hand. "We are leaving." The ride back in the armored SUV was suffocatingly tense. I opened my mouth to ask him what Min-jae meant, but the words never left my throat. Blinding headlights flashed from the blind intersection. A massive, deafening crash shattered the night. Metal screamed as a heavy truck T-boned us at highway speed, launching our armored car off the asphalt and sending the entire world violently spinning upside down. The world stopped spinning with a sickening crunch of collapsing steel. I hung upside down in the crushed cabin, my ears ringing violently over the hiss of a ruptured radiator. Before panic could fully set in, strong hands gripped my waist, unbuckling my seatbelt and hauling me through the shattered window. Tae-sung dragged me into the freezing, rain-slicked woods just as automatic gunfire erupted behind us, tearing into the overturned wreckage of our SUV. We ran. Stripped of his loyal guards and his impenetrable empire, Tae-sung navigated the treacherous mountain terrain with lethal focus, his iron grip on my hand the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. Hours blurred into an agonizing trek through the biting cold until a shadow emerged against the moonlight, a rustic, long-abandoned hunting cabin hidden deep within the Taebaek Mountains. Inside, it was a tomb of freezing dust and damp wood. Tae-sung immediately barred the heavy door, pulling out a burner phone. He cursed under his breath, tossing the useless plastic onto a rotting table. "No signal. The comms are completely dead." We were entirely alone. The realization should have been terrifying, but as I watched Tae-sung, his bespoke suit ruined, his face bruised and smeared with blood, the untouchable Mafia king vanished. In his place stood a man bleeding just to keep me alive. The temperature plummeted rapidly as a brutal mountain storm rolled in. The cabin had no heat and only one narrow, dust-covered mattress pushed into the corner. Shivering so violently my teeth chattered, I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to suppress a sob. "Come here," Tae-sung said softly, a stark contrast to the roaring wind outside. I didn't hesitate. I crawled onto the mattress and he immediately pulled me against his chest, trapping my freezing frame beneath his heavy wool coat. His body heat was a sudden, overwhelming relief. In the pitch-black cabin, the forced proximity stripped away our contract, our titles, and our walls. My hands rested flat against his chest, feeling the rapid, heavy thud of his heart. He looked down at me, his eyes dark and feverish in the shadows. He reached up, his bruised knuckles gently brushing a streak of dirt from my cheek. The adrenaline of surviving the crash finally shattered, leaving behind a raw, desperate need to feel alive. I didn't think. I simply tilted my chin upward. Tae-sung groaned, a deep, primal sound, and crashed his lips against mine. It wasn't gentle, it was a desperate, bruising collision, fueled by the terror of almost losing each other. My hands tangled in his thick, ruined hair, pulling him closer as his kiss burned away the freezing cold, consuming me entirely. Hours later, the storm howled outside. Tae-sung had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep, his heavy arm draped protectively over my waist. The biting cold began to seep back into my bones. Careful not to wake him, I slipped out from under his grip to search the dark corners for extra blankets. Instead, beneath a loose floorboard in the closet, my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it free, wiping away the thick layer of dust. It was a heavy, locked steel briefcase. My heart plummeted into my stomach as I read the silver engraving stamped next to the combination dial. Yoon Se-yeon. My hands trembled so violently I could barely grip the thin wire of my hairpin. I knelt on the freezing floorboards, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I worked the makeshift pick into the briefcase's steel lock. I'd told myself I was being paranoid, that Viper's venomous whisper at the gala was just psychological warfare. Click. The heavy latches sprang open. I lifted the lid, and the remaining oxygen vanished from my lungs. It wasn't money or syndicate secrets inside. It was me. Dozens of surveillance photographs spilled across the dusty floor. Me walking out of my university library 3 years ago. Me sipping coffee at a corner cafe. My father, completely unaware, sitting at a rigged underground baccarat table, surrounded by men wearing Beko syndicate pins. Beneath the photos lay ledgers, bank transfers detailing exactly how Tae-sung had secretly funneled limitless credit to the loan sharks, orchestrating my father's insurmountable debt perfectly. He didn't save you from your father's debt, little bird. He built the cage. The lingering warmth of his kiss turned to absolute freezing ash on my lips. The terrified, grateful girl who just surrendered to him vanished, instantly replaced by a blinding, fiery rage. I had been a puppet dancing on strings made of my own family's blood. You were never supposed to find that. I whipped around. Tae-sung stood in the center of the dark cabin, his eyes dropping from the scattered photos to my face. There was no surprise in his expression, only a dark, heavy resignation. You did this, I breathed, my voice shaking with a rage so potent it physically hurt. I hurled a stack of photos at his chest. You ruined my father. You trapped me. He didn't flinch as the pictures fluttered to the floor. He stepped toward me, his gaze blazing with a terrifying, unrepentant intensity. I secured you. For 3 years I watched from the shadows, making sure no one else could touch you. Yes, I built the cage, Se-yeon, and I would do it 1,000 times over to keep you. You're a monster, I choked out, backing away toward the entryway. I'm leaving. Contract be damned. You are mine, he growled, closing the distance, his voice vibrating with a desperate, absolute obsession. You are never walking out that door. Watch me. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the cold fireplace and swung it blindly. He caught the iron shaft with his bare hand, wincing as the metal bit into his palm. It was the only opening I needed. I shoved him backward, wrenched the heavy cabin door open, and sprinted blindly into the raging blizzard. The freezing snow bit into my bare skin like glass as I plunged into the dark, howling wind. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I had to escape the man who had stolen my life. Suddenly, a massive, rough hand clamped tightly over my mouth. Before I could even scream, brutal arms dragged me backward into the freezing shadows of the trees, and the chilling, triumphant laugh of Viper's lieutenants echoed through the dark. The metallic taste of my own blood was choking me. I was suspended by my wrists from a rusted steel beam in the center of a cavernous, freezing meatpacking warehouse. My muscles screamed in agony, my body shivering uncontrollably as Viper's men threw another bucket of ice water over my bruised, trembling frame. Choi Min-jae circled me like a vulture, dragging the flat edge of a combat knife lightly against my damp collarbone. "I will ask you one last time, little bird," he purred, his dark eyes shining with sadistic glee. "What are the security access codes to the Baeko shipping ports?" "I don't know," I gasped, my voice barely a cracked, broken whisper. Min-jae sighed in exaggerated disappointment before violently backhanding me across the face. My head snapped to the side, my vision fragmenting into a blinding explosion of stars. They had been tearing me down for hours, demanding the internal vulnerabilities of Tae-sung's empire. But as the physical agony deepened, the blinding rage that made me flee into the snow began to fade, replaced by a devastating, undeniable truth. Kang Tae-sung was a ruthless manipulator who had orchestrated my entire downfall just to possess me. But he was my monster. He had shielded me with his own body, bled to protect me, and kissed me with a desperate reverence that could never be faked. Even as I hung, bleeding in the dark, surrounded by death, my heart ached not for my own survival, but for his. "Please," I prayed silently into the freezing void, "please stay away. Don't let them kill you." "You are remarkably stubborn for a civilian," Min-jae sneered, grabbing a fist of my damp hair and wrenching my head back. He pointed a blood-stained finger toward a red, blinking light mounted on a tripod in the far shadows. "But it doesn't matter if you talk. This live feed has been broadcasting your pretty, bleeding face directly to your husband's private server for the last hour." Panic, icy and absolute, seized my lungs. It wasn't an interrogation, it was bait. Min-jae stepped back, gesturing grandly to the rafters and shadows where dozens of heavily armed men waited. The red laser sights of their assault rifles cut through the dusty, freezing air like a deadly spiderweb. "He is too arrogant, too obsessed with what he owns. He will come, and my men will turn him into ash." "No," I sobbed, thrashing weakly against my bindings, the rusted chains biting into my flesh. Suddenly, the deafening screech of tearing metal violently silenced the warehouse. The massive, reinforced, corrugated steel doors at the far end of the building blew open with a concussive shockwave that rattled the concrete beneath my feet. Thick dust and freezing rain swirled into the cavernous space. From the blinding glare of the floodlights, a lone silhouette emerged. He wore a pristine black suit, his face a chilling, bloodless mask of absolute calm. He didn't bring his syndicate, he drew no weapon. Kang Tae-sung walked slowly into the crosshairs of 50 loaded rifles, raising his empty hands to surrender his life and his throne for mine. Min-jae's triumphant laughter echoed through the freezing warehouse, a grating, vicious sound that made my stomach churn. "The great king of the underworld," Viper mocked, lowering his knife from my throat to gesture at Tae-sung's empty hands. "Brought to his knees by a pathetic civilian. Kill him." The deafening click of 50 rifles chambering rounds echoed in unison. But Tae-sung didn't flinch. A terrifying, glacial smirk curved the corner of his mouth. "Did you really think I would walk into hell without bringing my own fire?" Before Min-jae could react, the skylights above shattered in a synchronized, explosive cascade of glass and smoke. Flashbang grenades rained down from the rafters, detonating with blinding, ear-splitting fury. Absolute chaos erupted. Through the blinding white smoke, Ryu Jin-woo and dozens of elite Beko operatives descended on ziplines, raining merciless, suppressed automatic fire down upon Viper's men. The cavernous warehouse became a cinematic nightmare of muzzle flashes, shattering concrete and sprays of crimson. I watched in awe and terror as Tae-sung transformed from a captive king into an apex predator. He didn't duck for cover. Moving with lethal, terrifying speed, he disarmed the nearest guard, turning the man's own weapon against the room in a blur of brutal, unforgiving violence. He was a force of nature, carving a bloody path straight toward me. Every movement was exact, merciless, and fueled by a dark obsession that I finally understood. "Se-yeon!" he roared, dropping his empty rifle and pulling a sleek combat knife from his jacket. He reached me, his fierce blade making quick work of the rusted chains suspending my wrists. My legs gave out instantly, but I didn't hit the floor. Tae-sung caught me, pulling my battered, shivering frame flush against his chest. As stray bullets sparked and whined against the steel beams around us, he tucked my head beneath his chin, wrapping his arms around me to create an impenetrable human shield. "I've got you. You're safe." But the war wasn't over. Through the dissipating smoke, a bloodied and frantic Choi Min-jae dragged himself out from behind a fallen crate. His empire was burning, his men decimated. With trembling hands and a scream of pure, sadistic hatred, Viper raised a heavy silver revolver. He wasn't aiming at the untouchable Mafia boss. He was aiming directly at my head. Tae-sung's eyes widened, tracking the gleam of the weapon in his periphery. There was no time to draw his gun, no time to pull us to cover. With a desperate, earth-shattering roar, Tae-sung grabbed my waist and violently spun our bodies, throwing me completely behind him. The deafening crack of the revolver pierced the chaos. A sickening, heavy impact struck the direct center of Tae-sung's chest. He froze, the fierce air leaving his lungs in a choked gasp. His dark, obsessive eyes locked onto mine for one agonizing, apologetic second before his knees buckled and his massive body collapsed heavily onto the blood-soaked concrete. The rhythmic, agonizing beep of the heart monitor was the only sound tethering me to sanity. For 3 endless days, I sat beside the pristine hospital bed, my fingers wrapped tightly around Kang Tae-sung's cold, limp hand. The invincible king of the underworld looked terrifyingly mortal. Beneath the tangle of IV tubes and heavy bandages covering his chest, the slow, shallow rise and fall of his breath was my only proof that the bullet hadn't stolen him from me completely. When his dark eyelashes finally fluttered open, my breath caught in my throat. His piercing eyes, clouded with painkillers and sheer exhaustion, slowly focused on my face. But instead of relief, a profound, devastating sorrow shadowed his gaze as he took in the dark purple bruises and cuts Viper had left on my skin. He didn't speak. He weakly pulled his hand from my grasp, a sudden rejection that stung sharper than any physical blow. With a painful grimace, he reached toward the sterile bedside table, his trembling fingers pushing a thick manila envelope across the tray. "Take it," he rasped, his voice a broken, hollow shell of his former commanding baritone. My hands shook as I opened the heavy flap. Inside rested a stack of legal documents, annulment papers, already bearing his dark, definitive signature at the bottom. Tucked beneath them was a brand new passport in my name and an offshore bank draft of $10 million. "Tae-sung," I whispered, the air suddenly freezing in my lungs. "His world is fire and blood, Se-yeon. If you stay, you will burn. I orchestrated your fall, but I will not be the reason you die." "What about the syndicate?" I choked out, a hot tear spilling over my lashes. "The elders." "Jin-woo will handle them," he cut in, his eyes squeezing shut. He couldn't even bear to look at me. "The contract is void. Your father is safe. You are free. Now leave, before I become selfish enough to trap you again." The heavy silence of the room pressed down on me. I stared at the man who had manipulated my entire life only to take a bullet to the chest to give it back. I looked down at the documents that promised me everything I had originally begged for: safety, normalcy, and a clean escape from the Mafia's suffocating grip. Slowly, I stood. The scrape of my chair echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Tae-sung didn't open his eyes, his breathing ragged as he waited for the agonizing finality of my departure. I turned my back to the bed and walked out the heavy oak door, my footsteps fading into the sterile hospital corridor. Left behind on the bedside table, perfectly untouched, were the annulment papers and the passport. The air in the Baiko Syndicate's high-rise boardroom was thick with expensive cigar smoke and open treason. Kang Tae-sung sat at the head of the massive obsidian table, his face a pale, lethal mask of indifference, despite the bullet wound still healing in his chest. Across from him, Elder Park slammed a heavy fist against the polished wood, his voice dripping with venom. "You are unfit to rule, Tae-sung. You lost the girl. The marriage contract is broken, and your weakness has embarrassed this syndicate for the last time. Step down, or we will remove you ourselves." Kang Tae-sung's dark eyes narrowed, his hand slowly reaching for the heavy pistol inside his jacket. But before he could issue a death sentence, the heavy mahogany doors violently burst open. Ryu Jin-woo stepped aside, a rare, knowing smirk playing on his lips. The breathless silence that fell over the room was absolute. I walked through the doorway, the sharp, rhythmic click of my stilettos echoing like gunfire. I was no longer the terrified hostage in a torn dress. Wrapped in a razor-sharp, blood-red designer suit, I kept my spine straight and my chin tipped upward. I met the stunned, fearful gazes of the syndicate elders with eyes made of pure ice. I didn't stop until I reached the head of the table. Tae-sung looked up at me, his chest heaving, his dark eyes wide with a profound shock and a rapidly igniting, possessive fire. "My husband hasn't lost anything," I announced, my voice ringing out with unshakable authority. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the annulment papers he had given me, tearing them cleanly in half before letting the pieces flutter onto the table. "The contract is void because this marriage is no longer a business arrangement." Elder Park sputtered, his face turning a furious shade of purple. "You insolent little—" Kang Tae-sung moved with terrifying speed. In a blur of motion, he was on his feet, his massive frame shielding mine as he slammed a silver handgun directly onto the center of the table. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I didn't cower behind him. I stepped up to his side, sliding my hand boldly over his. I looked up into his fierce, obsessive gaze. "I told you I wasn't running," I whispered, lifting my free hand to cup his cheek. I pulled him down, pressing a desperate, fiery kiss to his lips, a public, absolute vow of loyalty in front of the wolves. When Kang Tae-sung broke the kiss, his eyes were burning with an undeniable, victorious supremacy. He wrapped a heavy, protective arm around me, turning to face the terrified men who had just plotted his downfall. "Elder Park," Tae-sung purred, his voice a low, lethal promise. "You and your co-conspirators are officially dismissed." At his command, Ryu Jin-woo and a dozen heavily armed loyalists flooded the room, dragging the screaming traitors out to face the bloody consequences of their mutiny. Kang Tae-sung didn't even watch them go. He pulled me tightly against his chest, resting his chin on the top of my head as we looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering Seoul skyline, two rulers forged in fire, forever untouchable. And just like that, the contract is torn, and a new queen of the underworld has taken her throne. Se-yeon and Tae-sung proved that sometimes you have to burn your old world to the ground to build the one you were meant to rule. If this story had your heart racing and you absolutely loved their descent into beautiful, dangerous obsession, make sure to hit that like button right now. It tells the algorithm and me that you want more cinematic, high-stakes romance just like this. Subscribe to the channel and turn on those notifications because you never know what dark secrets and thrilling romances we are going to unlock next. Before you click away, the Backhoe Syndicate is looking to expand its global territory. Drop into the comments down below and let me know exactly where in the world you are watching from. Thank you for surviving the night with us. Until our next deadly romance, stay safe and don't trust the shadows.